Good morning. Welcome to Faith Stories for the Queer Family. Every week I look at what we call the lectionary texts and think about how they might look for us and how we might reclaim or push against these stories that may or may not be familiar. In Christendom, all four of the Gospel stories, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that made the cut and are in what we call the Bible, all four have some things in common. One thing they have in common is that they all have the story of Jesus' gruesome death and that horrific passion narrative, it's called, and then the resurrection. The other thing that all four of them have in common is a collection of miracle stories. Now, the stories vary a little with each telling, but all four, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, share miracles. Miracle stories are inherently problematic, I think, for white folks, or at least for folks like myself that were raised in kind of middle America whiteness, Wonder Bread world. We were taught a very kind of rationalistic thinking that things were either true or false, right or wrong, good or bad, kind of binaries in every sense. And things were either fact or fiction. And by that we meant good or bad. By that we meant science or faith. You could have science or miracles, right? Given the choice to either suspend scientific understanding and embrace the story or, give up on the story, most of us gave up on the story. And rightly so. Miracle stories exist in many cultures. They're a staple of storytelling. Some of the Buddha miracle stories are really sweet. There's the story of when Buddha was just a tiny little infant, and inexplicably he stood and he walked 7 steps, and in each step, each of his footprints, a lotus flower bloomed. There's a Native American story where an elder tells a young child that, I don't know if it ever really happened that way, but I know that it is true. But even among miracle stories, this story this week is a whopper. It's a miracle on a miracle on a miracle with a teacher. The miracle, first of all, the most amazing miracle is it's a resurrection story. It's a story of an encounter with Jesus not long after, but after he's dead. And inexplicably, somehow, he is there with them, walking and talking and eating, right? So you have the resurrection miracle. And then you have the miracle added on it that they are out at sea with these empty boats and distraught and, feeling hopeless. And, Jesus appears and says, cast your net on the other side. And they cast. And all of a sudden there's this miraculous, mysterious boatload, 153 large fish. I went down the rabbit hole with that 153 this week. Like, what is that about, right? It's actually, in numerology, kind of an important number, but not so much for this story. But the miracle that all of a sudden, 153 large fish, pretty impressive. And then you have the third miracle where they're gathered around the fire and this resurrected Jesus, like, what is that about, is eating the fish. Eating and drinking. How does that happen? Right? Who is he? What is he? And in the midst of those miracles, miracle on miracle on miracle, you have that little teaching. Jesus says to Peter, Peter, do you love me? Of course I love you. Well, then feed my sheep. And then Jesus says it again. Peter, do you love me? Oh, of course I love you. You know I love you. I've always loved you. Then feed my sheep. And then a third time, like, just in case you didn't get it, like as many times as you denied me, Peter, do you love me? Yes, I told you, I love you. Well, then feed my sheep. This little interchange between Jesus and Peter, this admonishment to take care of the children, the sheep, the people in the community, is sermon in and of itself. It preaches, and I think many of us have preached on this, and we could preach a million sermons on this, and it would never be too many. It's in and of itself enough of this text. But so why did John put miracle on miracle on miracle on this text? What's the point with this kind of hyper-miracleizing this very basic fundamental teaching? Why did John go to such an effort? I'm really lucky to be married to a science teacher, and several years ago we took a trip to the Field Museum in Chicago, and she narrated a tour for me through the Evolving Planet exhibit on that first floor of the Field Museum. And it was astounding, because as she's talking and I'm seeing these incredible images in front of me, I'm carrying with me Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, two very different creation stories, and then I'm seeing the scientific understanding of creation. And all of a sudden, these stories, these miracle stories, these very rudimentary, very ancient world kind of mythical stories had a new resonance for me, a new understanding. These creation stories, the first and the second one, very different from each other, were told for centuries, eons before people had written language to write them down. And certainly long before we had any kind of scientific understanding of what might actually have happened. And these stories about what happened, not how it happened, but about what happened, right, become more important as they become less historical. More important, more illuminating, more valuable as I let go of their historicity. They're not about what happens scientifically, but they have something to say about how we as people interact with this world. So this miracle story of the resurrection isn't just about Jesus the person. It's about when shit happens, right? When it goes down, when the state to whom you're supposed to be paying homage, that's supposed to have your back, that's supposed to be your secure place, is all of a sudden your enemy. When you are an enemy of the state, it's like that kind of trauma. The world never looks the same after that, right? That's the kind of trauma the people in Ferguson that were out in the streets experienced, right? When all of a sudden you aren't a citizen of the state, you're an enemy of the state. When everything you banked on, or were told you should bank on, or believed you could bank on, was obviously, clearly false. When your hope is clean cut off, right? You're in the ashes. But inexplicably, in that place of despair, he's alive. And again, I'm not talking historical he, I'm talking whatever it is. The presence, the hope, the phoenix is rising, right? The daffodil comes up every fucking spring. Like, I don't know how it happens, but life's longing for itself trumps our evil again and again and again. And the people who believed in Jesus gathered after he had died and said, we feel the love. See, that's it. It's the love. The love. The love is still with us. So take care of each other. There's a Buddhist teaching that says that we should turn all mishaps into the path. And the teaching is that, if you're human, if you're alive, if you dare to breathe, if you're moving through this earthly, tangible, real life world, bad things are going to happen. And sometimes they're going to be catastrophic things, right? And sometimes they're just going to be ordinary, run-of-the-mill hurts and stumbles and falls. But If you dare to be fully human and fully alive, bad things are going to happen. It's inevitable. It's just part of the gig. The question is, what do you do with it? Right? Buddha's teaching is you turn every mishap into the path. For people who followed Jesus, those early followers, they turned the mishap of the crucifixion and that horrific chapter, they turned that mishap into their path. They proclaimed that he is still alive. They proclaimed that love lives. They proclaimed that something is bigger, right, than this evil of the state. They turned the mishap into the path. And they invited us to do the same. If you believe in him, if you believe that all hope is not lost, if you believe that something bigger than us still exists in spite, then feed the sheep. Take care of the children. What's really important when we're talking about economic systems and, Christian economics, I don't buy any of that. The ethic by which I would judge any economic system is how it handles the one most vulnerable, right? And if it doesn't feed the children, if your economic system leaves people out in the cold and hungry and homeless, it's devoid of love, which means it's devoid of anything holy. The bottom line, the simple message: feed my sheep. Take care of the children. So let me go ahead and say it plain and simple. Capitalism and Jesus, they don't go together. Fight me on that one. Now, quit fussing about the miracles. Quit hyper-focusing on the details in the text. It's easy to do. I did it all week. And get on with the business. Feed my children.